Everyone, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. This is John O'Sullivan, and I'm so excited to have my great friend Angela Hucles Mangano on the podcast again. Um, I had Ange on many years ago, right in the beginning of the podcast. I was such a fan of her as an athlete, and now I've just been just in awe watching her career progress as she has gone from athlete to advocate to uh, professional franchise owner and general manager in professional women's soccer and so much more. Angela is a two-time Olympic gold medalist and a two-time World Cup bronze medalist for U.S. soccer. Played many years as a professional player, and she was actually U.S. Soccer Foundation's 2009 Humanitarian of the Year. Her current day job is the general manager of Los Angeles women's professional soccer team, Angel City FC, where she oversees the sporting vision of the club, the soccer operations, including coaching and the first team, player care, medical performance, and all the wellness programs and sports science. And she's also one of the founding owners. So she's an owner and a general manager of this super exciting sports team, which we'll be talking about today. She is the past president of the Women's Sports Foundation as well, which was founded by Billie Jean King, and has also been a soccer analyst during World Cups and Olympics for Fox, ESPN, and NBC, as well as ACC and SEC men's and women's soccer. Um, I mean, she's just, such a passionate and helpful person. And, her talk, our TED talk many years ago on, being an introvert in an extroverted world and how we can coach and help our introverted athletes was so powerful and really became an essential part of my coaching. And so we'll talk about that here as well today. Okay. So get ready, get set for Angela, because this is going to be an amazing podcast. Now, before we jump in, just talk about amazing. Our 2024 Way of Champions Conference is alive and kicking right now. Registration is open and it's early bird, so you can save yourself $100 if you register now. We've announced two of our guests or three guest speakers. We are honored to have Tara Vanderveer, who just broke Mike Krzyzewski's record for the most NCAA basketball coaching wins. She was a three-time national champion at Stanford, and we reached out to her and took her less than 10 minutes to come back and say yes. And she's just recently retired and rewired and refired, as Jerry would say. And so we're so excited to have Tara presenting this summer. And then we also have Pete Steinberg. Pete coached in two World Cups and an assistant coach in the Olympics, and then was the performance director for USA Women's Rugby. He won 11 national championships on the collegiate level as well in rugby. And his day job is as a leadership consultant and just wrote a great book called Leadership Shock. We just had him on the podcast as well. It's just going to be great. He lives in Colorado. We had a great conversation with him, and Jerry and I said, "Would you like to present?" And he said, "Of course, it sounds wonderful." So, yeah, so super excited about those two. So go to changingthegameproject.com, main menu. You can register right there. And if you have a group of five or more, so your athletic department or a couple coaches from your club or school, we give you 50% off. So it's a great, great deal. Okay. Now, before we dive in, thanks to our friends at Sprocket Sports. Check them out, sprocketsports.com/CTG. They're just an amazing organization. If you're looking for a new website, a new registration tool, and by far the best registration and communication tool that I have seen, just go to sprocketsports.com. Tell them that you heard about them on the Way Champions podcast and from Changing the Game Project, because they're great people doing great things. They understand the front end and the back end and how to make your club or your league run efficiently. Okay. And then finally, thanks to our Patreon podcast champions. You all are the best. These are the people who make a small monthly donation or annual donation. Help us put this out every single week. 373 straight weeks, I believe we've now managed to pull this off. So it's pretty cool. So thank you to all of you. If you want to become a sponsor of this podcast and get your name read out in the podcast, go to patreon.com/Way of Champions. Okay. But for now, get ready, get set. Angela Hucles Mangano talking about her incredible life. Enjoy, everyone. Angela, welcome to the Way of Champions. It's a great honor to have you back on. You were one of our first ever guests, and it's so exciting because your life has changed so much, and we've changed so much. It's just great to have you back on.
Thanks, John. It's just always great to spend time with you and love what you're doing.
Yeah, well, last time we had you on, we started this. You were visiting, and you had visited me in Bend. You had just
Yep.
done a TED Talk up here at TEDx Bend, which was just amazing. And you were sort of in the stage post athlete. Then you were the advocate. You'd just come down from Women's Sports Foundation, but now you've just moved on to so many incredible things. But I don't even know. I was going back and forth where to start today. And I just want to start with like your playing career. And one of my favorite stories that you ever told me was your story of the 2008 Olympics and taking the place of Abby Wambach and how you needed to be Abby as the soccer player, but not Abby the person. And that I think really spoke to you and your whole career. Maybe can you talk about that a little bit? And we'll just start there.
Sure. Yeah. Bring me way back, John. And what's so fascinating about that specific story, and thank you for being the driving impetus to get me to do that TEDx talk in Bend, which was incredible, an incredible experience just to go through, and shared, this story, that 2008 Olympics, and the role that I had, which changed significantly going into that tournament. That story, I feel like how I identify with that story has also evolved over the period of since we first talked about that. So happy to start there. And essentially the short story is that 2008 Olympics, we're going into our last friendly match leading up to the Olympic Games. We are playing Brazil, and Abby Wambach, our leading goal scorer for Team USA, goes into a tackle with a Brazilian defender and breaks her leg. Like, instantly in that moment, she knew it. I think we all knew it. And the ramifications of that was, we had to shift our game plan of how we were going to ultimately achieve success in the 2008 Olympic Games. And my role at that time period had been, definitely getting minutes as a player on that roster, a role player, and essentially my role had changed. Typically I was coming off the bench, as a game changer, and on the flight over had that conversation with my coach at the time, Pia Suntaga, that I would start as a forward. I was typically playing midfield for the US team at that time. And, here's the plan using the skill sets that I did have. Here was how we were going to work off of the skill sets of my teammates and really, try to create some offensive threat, given that our leading goal scorer was now no longer going to be able to play and compete in those games. So ultimately the plan worked, not just, my role, but how we all had to shift in that tournament. And we won Olympic gold in that tournament, which was what we wanted to do, right? That was the goal, the outcome. My role change also helped the team in terms of my contributions to the offense. And I was the leading goal scorer for that team, for Team USA, and had the second most goals in the tournament overall. So I had the silver boot for the Olympic Games. So, I think for me, it was a real big lesson of the power of we, and not the power of me.
Mhm.
And also, and the majority of my TEDx talk was really about, me as an introvert and having a leadership opportunity. And, you know, Abby was definitely not an introvert.
I
She
was
was an
going to say, if
extrovert,
anyone doesn't know who Abby Wambach is, she is
right?
not an introvert.
Right. And
Yeah.
so even those leadership styles, right? And how the adjustment of the makeup of the roster and the team had to shift and change. So many different things at, world stage, highest stakes and all of that, and ultimately we came together and um, we're successful. And I think,
Yeah.
the shift of that story and the narrative that has really been told is, I'm coming in and I'm replacing Abby. And I think that was still the state of mind that I was in, even in giving that TEDx talk. And I
Mhm.
think now it wasn't really me replacing Abby, right? It was just stepping up in a leadership role for what was needed at
Mhm.
that time for the team. And I think ultimately, as I've been able to expand different leadership opportunities and develop in my own leadership skills, being able to adapt to what is needed is a huge positive leadership trait that I
Yeah.
think, we all have different types of profiles, right? If you do the DISC
Yeah.
assessment and, we can be adaptive, we can, have natural innate skills, but ultimately, I think being able to provide what is needed in that moment
Mhm.
is a really um, excellent skill of leadership to have. And I think that's where it needs to be practiced, but ultimately people all have that ability within them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love this idea of, recognizing how can I cement the cracks, if you will, right? What does the
Mhm.
team need in this moment? Whether I'm a
Right.
player on the team, whether I'm a coach of a team or an assistant coach or
Yeah.
in any sort of team, right? There's something that other people bring, and sometimes just recognizing that. So here's what I want to say. I mean, I forget what year your talk was, 2016 or something
I,
like that,
yeah, I think
probably ish,
2016, 2015, 16.
right?
Yeah.
So here's parts that I remember from that years later, and it
Mhm.
really changed me as a coach. Um, Number one, in this recognition, and these are things that you talked about then, and I love how it's sort of evolved in your mind.
Yeah.
Um, you know, you talked then about how the team gave you space to be Angela and didn't
Yep.
expect you to be Abby, right? We
Right.
weren't we were bringing on Angela, the player who plays differently, right? Like, no offense, you're not 6'2" or whatever, like,
None
you know,
taken.
no, no, like so it's the soccer is different, but
Right.
also the personality is different. And so they let you lead in your own quiet way, lead through
Mhm.
actions, lead through that. You weren't going to be the rah-rah in the locker room or things like that. And I remember you talking then about how important it was that your coach didn't expect you to be Abby the person and your teammates didn't. They just wanted you to be the best version of Angela. And that's all stuck with
Yeah.
me as like a really important thing. And you told a story, I think in your TED talk, or at least to me, about I think after the Olympic semifinal. So you guys are going to the final, and you went to dinner with your parents. Do
Mhm.
you remember this story at all? Because I do.
I remember going to, I'm not sure which store this was. I just remember being like exhausted.
Yeah,
That might have been part of it. I don't know if that was part that I
yeah,
shared or not.
yeah. Well, you said you went to dinner with your parents, and you were so tired, right, and exhausted from the stress of the tournament and everything. You're like you didn't say a word the whole dinner. And they just
Yeah.
had a conversation and let Angela be Angela and
Yeah.
weren't like, what's wrong with you? You just won the Olympic semifinal. What do you, they just let you be
Yeah.
you and how important that was. And so I've always thought about that as a coach. I always felt like I think sort of before that, right? When you have a new team or you replace a player with this player, you want them to be that person, but they're not that person. And really what you have to
Yeah.
do is find their strengths and pull those out of them and then fill in the other stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think what is great and how, and I think everybody has a role within, your development, your growth, and being very selective of who your support team is,
Hmm.
because definitely moments like those are so critical, right? I needed my recharge time, right? As an introvert. Obviously it's an emotional journey, competing in an Olympic Games. And I think having a support team that honors and respects, how you need to do you, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I think being able to really share this journey along with my family, my parents have been incredible support to me, my brother as well, and just how they have supported us with our passions, with our careers, with our purpose. And I think that's what's been so special about participating in this sport. They've always been there, and we've all learned together what the needs really are. But I think ultimately they know that, they knew that then. And it wasn't about, you know, they knew without even needing to ask,
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
needed. So I think that's what made that part so special. And, just them being there was what I needed, right? I
Yeah.
didn't need to engage in conversation. I didn't need to break down the game and analyze that with
Mm.
them. Didn't need to do any debriefs. I just needed to be, and I just need them there physically there with me,
Yeah.
which is what happened.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that was, your metaphorical car ride home after, right? It was just like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't need anything from you right now except just a
Yep.
place to emotionally and physically recover from
Exactly.
everything here. Um,
Yeah.
you're a parent now, you have two kids.
Hmm.
Um, like I see this with my son who's very introverted and I'm not, and my daughter's not. And so it's been a challenge that's made me a much better person is giving
Mm.
him the time and space to unwind or and things like that,
Yeah.
Um, and to speak and to tell his story, because my tendency is to jump in or whatever. And so have you, I mean, I don't know anything about your kids' personalities,
Yeah.
but does it test you as well?
Kids always test you, don't they,
Yeah,
John?
yes, they do. Yes,
In
they
different
do.
ways, in different ways. It's interesting, I think. So my son is 6.5, my daughter's 3.5, and, both have vibrant personalities already. And my son is definitely more like me in the sense of um, a little bit more of the reserved, but I think a little bit more assertive, perhaps even.
Mhm.
So, you know, um, I actually just said to him this morning how proud I was of him because of how he's been using his voice. And I think
Mhm.
asking questions and challenging situations
Mhm.
in really appropriate ways,
Mhm.
for things that he doesn't quite understand or doesn't quite think are right or agree with, or, or things that he does feel like need to be voiced and heard. So, just to see him at such a young age, stepping into that. And
Mhm.
I want to encourage that because I think it's taken me such a long time to do that and do that consistently.
Mhm.
And I think, those are different aspects that, I want to make sure that he understands like how powerful he is.
Mhm.
I think my daughter is powerful within her own right. And what
Mhm.
she's taught me already is just she knows what she wants.
Mhm.
And, she's not afraid of expressing that either,
Mhm.
which, I learned from her too. So I
Mhm.
think they definitely have different personalities. I think we're still, watching them grow into, their personalities and into their own, obviously, still being
Mhm.
young, but um, there are, I think, ways to honor, who they are just individually, right?
Mhm.
Regardless of introvert, extrovert, ambivert. And I
Mhm.
think also just making sure that, we are an adventurous family, right? We like to
Mhm.
do things and explore together, but then also honoring, and my wife is more like that side, right? And I'm more
Yeah.
like, I'd love to just like a weekend at home and just hanging out. Like that's great.
That
That sounds
sounds
like
perfect.
fantastic to
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I do like the adventures too. So it's also the balance of, okay, the kids actually need a rest too, or the kids need some
Yeah.
space from us, right? And so how
Yeah.
we can, give them some of that space as well. So it's really just trying to figure out individual needs
Hmm.
mixed in with personality and styles as well. And I think that is part of the journey of
Yeah.
just parenting as
But I
well,
mean,
right?
parenting is practice for your relationships. I mean, this is the
Oh
thing. Like
yeah.
Jerry and I wrote this book last year, The Champion Teammate, about being a great
Hmm.
teammate. And it's like you'll be part of teams your whole life,
Right.
right? It might
Yeah.
be start with sports teams, but it's your community, it's your church, it's your
Yep.
family, it's work, whatever it is. You're always part of teams, and being a great teammate is always in demand. And I think
Hmm.
you've talked without maybe saying the exact word here, that sort of the biggest part of being a great teammate is first self-awareness. Like, who am
Yeah.
I, and what do I bring and what do I not bring, and what are the strengths, and then what are the things that limit me in this team thing that I can be a little more intentional about, and not
Hmm.
reactive about, and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's so important.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so,
for
so you,
sure.
I mean, you go like you're this leader on the Olympic team, and then, I mean, I'm not going to say your next leadership role, because you had this professional soccer career as well, but the Women's Sports Foundation, founded by Billie Jean King, which, I mean, I imagine being approached by Billie Jean King for anything is like one of the greatest honors of someone's
Yes,
life,
I say
right?
yes to whatever you say, BJ King. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk
Uh,
about that role and what you did there.
yeah. I think the Women's Sports Foundation is just such a special organization. Clearly started by Billie Jean King, I think just a living legend and someone who led and shifted and did so much for women, not just women's
Hmm.
sports, but I just think women in general and just, gender equality, pay equity, all of the things that we're still technically still fighting for and pushing for today and advocating for. And she really was at the forefront of being vulnerable and stepping into everything to take that on and
Hmm.
rallying the troops to really push things forward. And so I think, just a tremendous honor to even be affiliated with that organization
Hmm.
and what they do. And they continuously advocate for, safe spaces to play for young girls because of the benefits of that. And,
Hmm.
to still Title IX issues and,
Hmm.
where that's not being upheld. So I think being able to serve on the board and serve as the president of that organization, it was interesting because it really was such a safe space to practice leadership,
Hmm.
to practice being in a position that, you know, obviously had a lot of notoriety and attention because of Billie Jean King and,
Hmm.
bringing in, the best of the best in terms of sports, women in sports, and being able to honor their achievements. And I think it was just a wonderful way to be in an environment of like-minded people,
Hmm.
being in a sports and women in sports organization and really practice leadership
Hmm.
at that level, and learn from that group. So I really see that as um, that a really great learning opportunity for myself because ultimately the structure of the organization, there's still a CEO and
Hmm.
who technically
Runs it day to
runs the
day. Yeah.
board, right? And
Yeah.
day to
Yeah. Yeah.
day, but I was able to work with the CEO at that time. So,
Hmm.
and learn from her. So Deborah Larkin. And I think that is part of very intentionally what the Women's Sports Foundation has done and still continues to do.
Yeah.
And I think just also being values aligned was really significant. And I think all of the things that I had been doing up until that point, those were the things that the Women's Sports Foundation ultimately were carrying through. So it just made so much sense, and still very honored to have played a very small part
Yeah.
in the history of that foundation.
Yeah. And I mean, Billie Jean King as a leader, with not at that point being a CEO or anything, but just the
Mhm.
starter, and wanting to honor her legacy and everything. I mean,
Definitely.
I met her once. I've been in a room when she was interviewed, and she just has this presence and charisma about her
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
makes, and this like intense focus and passion, yet ability to listen. And I don't know, just
Hmm.
I've been in rooms with certain people who bring all these things together, and you just feel different when you're in their presence. And that was
Yeah.
my hour with Billie Jean King, was like, whoa. And I mean, what did you take away from your time getting to work
Yeah.
more directly with her?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it too. I remember specifically being in a board meeting one time, and there were other athletes that were around my age also on the board too, a handful of us. And a question was asked, and Billy piped up and said something. She's like, "But you know what? Don't listen to me. Like, what do the young people think? Like, just it's about what they think and what they think should be done right now." And she was constantly doing that. She was
Hmm.
constantly just allowing for this pathway of like empowering us to use our voice and encourage us to speak up and really take ownership of that. And that's been my like biggest kind of lesson from her, and just seeing how she led as well.
Hmm.
But the biggest thing, and even as you were describing, your experience with her, she just said things in a way or questioned things in a way that made you believe that it could get done.
Hmm.
Right. And
Hmm.
even if it was something that seemed, impossible or
Hmm.
very courageous and Herculean efforts to do, she basically just said, well, why not? Like,
Hmm.
absolutely, yes, this is something, and this is something worth fighting for, right? At the
Hmm.
very least. So I think the way that she would express things just made you have this belief that, yeah, we could get this done. Like, of
Yeah.
course, like this is the right thing to do. Why wouldn't we
Yeah.
go and challenge? So I think that's what I try to tap into when I think about her.
Yeah. And I would say the other thing, and like you just described in that board meeting, and like I've shared with our followers, my mom just passed. Billie Jean King, and always reminded me of my mom, not because of like hair color and the same
Mm.
glasses that they wore. Like there was like this physical resemblance a bit. Um, but she also like had this thing, my mom had this thing like, um, everyone I meet, I can learn something fascinating about. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and my sister was putting together her obituary, and said, whenever you asked her about how was your day, my mom would never say, "Oh, it was good." She would say, "I met the most fascinating person today." Like she was,
Amazing. Yeah.
and this was like my little, when someone would ask a question of her, she would kind of ask a question of them. Well, why do you feel that
Mm.
way or whatever? And I think there's that innate curiosity that not only makes her a great leader, but it makes people want to follow you. Like my
Yeah,
voice is valued and respected, and I have a voice as well. And your board meeting
totally.
describes that as well.
Yeah. I mean, just so full of life, right? And I
Yeah,
think that's what
yeah,
she's like, just has this youthful energy. Like she has so much energy,
yeah,
and I think that just it shines through. And it sounds like your mother, very similar, right? And just it sounds like, she like I believe Billy, like just get it, right? And she
yeah,
just got it, right? Understood what
yeah,
life was really about and that connection between one another. Yeah.
yeah. So now your leadership takes you into Angel
Mm.
City FC. And I mean, I think first of all, like you're one of the founding owners, and all women, correct?
Mhm.
And is that the only
Predominantly. Yeah.
predominantly,
Yeah.
um, but a very unique ownership group, from
Yeah.
Hollywood people to athletes to whatever.
Mhm.
What was what was it like the moment when someone said, Angela, you want to be an owner of a professional sports team? Like,
Yes, please.
yes, please. Right. But I
Yeah.
mean, I would think there's the yes, please, but also like the pinch myself, like how
Mhm.
far we have come, and whatever. And I think especially with the NWSL, and we'll talk about the league and the growth and everything now, but I mean, you were part of a couple of different iterations of professional women's soccer that started and failed and whatever.
Yeah.
And to see who's behind it now, and it's like, and these will be your co-owners, you'd be like, yes, please. Like, so talk about that opportunity.
Yeah, I think, and I'll tell you the story. Billie Jean King is one of the
Yeah.
investors as well as Angel City. I think we're actually at 100 investors right now, in total, if not a little bit more. So, um, I'm trying to even remember June 2020,
Yeah.
getting,
Weird time
um,
of in the world, right?
yeah, right. Yeah, this organization started in COVID, which is incredible. So it started fully remote, and getting an email from my former captains on the U.S. national team,
Hmm.
Julie Foudy, Mia Hamm, and on it were 12 different U.S. national team players that had ties to Southern California.
Hmm.
Um, Essentially just asking, hey, we just met Julie Ehrman, the president of Angel City, new professional women's soccer team coming to LA, and want to know if you all want to invest and become an owner in this club. And it was the fastest email chain response I've ever seen out of
Yes,
a
yes,
group of
yes, yes,
people.
yes.
It was like to a hell yeah, to like absolutely, I'm all in. Where do I send my check? Like
Hmm.
I had no idea what it even meant,
Hmm.
but it was just a resounding yes from every single person. And it was a full circle moment to have participated in the first ever women's pro soccer league for soccer in this
Hmm.
country,
Hmm.
the WSA, Women's United Soccer Association, and then the second iteration of that after the first 3 years of WUSA, and then the WPS. And
Yeah.
I essentially retired when the WPS was still in existence, and now we have the NWSL over a decade now. 12 seasons in, and still thriving. So I think to have, started as a little 7-year-old playing this sport, orange slices at halftime, right? Capri Suns, the whole gamut, going through the youth system, and ultimately making this my career, to
Hmm.
then finding myself in a position alongside my US national team,
Hmm.
teammates, right? To invest in a women's pro club in our
Hmm.
country, I think was just a full circle moment for all of us. It's extremely special for, as you can imagine, a variety of reasons,
Hmm.
and special to do it in that way, right? Because this club was started really purpose driven.
Hmm.
Natalie Portman heard Abby Wambach
Hmm.
speaking at a Time's Up event saying, when I retired and I received this, ESPY Award, Lifetime Achievement Award, alongside Peyton Manning, Kobe Bryant, and
Hmm.
we're in the green room talking about what's happening post retirement. And Abby's in a very different situation, right, than those two other athletes having winning the same award, right? And I
Hmm.
think Natalie hearing Abby talking about this and trying to understand why there was still such a discrepancy between pay for male athletes and female athletes, and
Hmm.
just asking questions, and finally going to a national team, US national team women's game, and experiencing that event, experiencing the popularity and the excitement around it. And then why don't we have a pro team here in LA, the
Hmm.
city of sports and entertainment, right? There is such a shift in momentum right now within the sport. Why aren't we capturing that? And, we've put pay equity, we put gender equity at the forefront of how we are starting this club, as well as just doing things different with
Hmm.
this investment group, right? We
Hmm.
have a predominantly female led and owned
Hmm.
soccer club, which
Hmm.
doesn't happen in this industry,
Yeah.
in professional sports. So, we've just done things so entirely different. We're flipping the script. We've been incredibly successful, especially off the pitch, in terms of
Mm.
really bringing awareness and starting this global brand. I was in the UK this past winter wearing my parka with the Angel City logo on it, and just getting stopped over and over again, like, oh, do you know Angel City? Oh,
Mm.
oh, that's a great club, and just seeing the impact that we've already made. I think that is what is so exciting about being a part of, again, a values aligned organization within my sport, alongside my teammates, and so many incredible people who are, just doing the grind of this
Yeah.
startup.
Yeah.
And now, the focus is really achieving that type of success, if not greater, on the pitch.
Yeah.
Because what I've learned through my experience with the US team, right? I think I take so many different learnings into my role now as general manager with Angel City, and how to build a positive culture, a high performance culture, one that is of an organization that is so purpose driven.
Hmm.
That purpose continues and is accelerated and makes its greatest impact when we
Yeah.
win on the pitch, right?
Yeah.
So that is a real, that's a real pressure, John, when I'm thinking about
Yeah.
we have the players and the staff who understand that and know that and take that to heart. And so, that is really what our challenge is right now, is how we can, meet those expectations, how we can be successful on the pitch, how we can win, because ultimately we know that is going to drive this purpose forward.
Yeah. And it's such a hard thing. I mean, Jerry and I talk on this podcast a lot about like a purpose-driven identity versus a performance-driven identity. And
Yeah,
and it's hard, right? Because if your identity is totally driven by performance, whether we win or lose, we failed,
right.
you know, it's not a healthy way to live, right? And of course we want
Yeah,
to win, right? But we don't control winning. There's so many things outside of our control that will determine that outcome, right? Versus this purpose-driven identity, the results on the field can fall short, yet we've still met our purpose. We've brought awareness. We've brought in more fans. We've spread the message. We've supported whatever that purpose is. We've pushed the equity talk, the pay talk forward. But yeah, when you get those two things clicking together, that's when you have the biggest impact. And I mean, in
right.
your role there, like I mean, general manager, and just in your bio, overseeing the sporting vision, all soccer operations, including coaching, first team, player care, medical and performance, sports science and wellness programs and resources. I can't even get the sentence out in a breath. That's a lot that ends at your desk,
Yeah,
right? That goes into, can we compete on Saturday,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So how do you lead all
yeah.
those different components?
With everybody. This is such
Yeah.
a collective, and talk about a team sport. This is just that at its core, right? This is
Hmm.
not something about one person. This is, um, you know, doing the daily things, and essentially, part of the exciting elements of doing all this, and the challenge really is that it hadn't been built yet,
Yeah.
right? So there was nothing that was there. So the opportunity was
And I was
that
just
we
going to say,
really,
most, because you've used sorry to interrupt, but you've used the
yeah,
word startup, and I meant to say this before.
yeah.
Most startups get to operate in the shadows. You're operating on the front page, right? So warts and
Yeah,
all, it's
yeah.
exposed for everybody. Sorry.
Good point. No, great point. We are not in the shadows, John. That is, that is and honestly, I did a 3-year strategic plan for the first time last year, because that was
Hmm.
the first opportunity really to get to it. And in the introductory page is, a quote by Billie Jean King, right? And I always say it's a pressure and a privilege to
Hmm.
be a part of this organization, because, of the pressures that I just mentioned. But it is a privilege, because we do get to build this and be a part of something that we all know is
Hmm.
uniquely special.
Hmm.
Um, but yes, there was nothing there. And I think that many of us had never been a part of a startup before, and
Yeah.
especially like you said, we started very public.
Yeah.
And so we have an incredible community. We have an incredible group of fans. We typically sell out all of our home games, 22,000 capacity stadium.
Hmm.
And, so we are very visible, and we are doing all these things. And, you know, we're definitely making mistakes, and we're definitely learning, and we're definitely growing, and we're getting better all at once, and all out for everyone to see. And so, with that comes a very, I think, unique opportunity, but a unique skill set of the people who are involved in this
Hmm.
club.
Hmm.
And it's a balance, it's really a balance. And I think it's leading with integrity, but it's leading, with transparency. It is getting process aligned. The communication has been something that we're still, trying to get even better. But how we communicate, when we communicate, why we're communicating, I think leading with intention has been from the start a really big thing, and how
Hmm.
we're intentionally designing and planning events, activities, organizations. I think we constantly go back to the why, right? I think
Hmm.
we need to constantly do that, but ultimately having clarity with our vision, right? I think
Hmm.
that has been the biggest thing, is just making sure that we are all very clear on why we're showing up, why we're here, um, why we continue to come back, right?
Hmm.
And through the adversity, we want to set that standard in women's professional sport globally, right? And I
And
think
is that the vision? Like,
that is the
everyone's got a
vision.
vision statement, but like we want to be the model organization for women's
Yeah.
sport in the world.
Yeah. That is the sporting vision. Yes. And ultimately that hadn't even been designed, stated, right? And I think, captured in a place until last year and really rolled out in this year. This is our
Hmm.
third season. So,
Hmm.
when you talk about a startup and you talk about forming an identity, right? I think some things have occurred naturally. I think ultimately we've worked really hard to get to a positive culture. I think the biggest thing I'm proud of and the most proud of is just where we are as a staff
Hmm.
in terms of um, the the quality of expert, in the positions, as well as the quality of the person, and how we work together. And,
Hmm.
again, we're not perfect. We're still not there yet, but I think
Hmm.
ultimately having the right foundation and support for our players was my priority coming into this role and position.
Hmm.
And how that then filters into the locker room culture. And it is, I think we're showing up in different ways and different decision making right now, where we can say, this is a team, we before me culture. And I
Yeah.
think, if it's not that, then people are going to stick out. And I think that's where, we have to show up in different ways daily, and that's how we get this done.
Yeah. The word that is like in the back of my head right now with all that's on your plate is trust. Like you have to
Yes.
trust so many people to do their jobs, right? Because
Yes.
in charge of all these different departments and stuff, you can't micromanage any of it. Like
Yeah.
there's not enough hours in the day, never mind being a mom and a spouse and all the other things that you
Yeah.
want to do
Yeah.
and sleeping, right? Like like,
What sleep.
sleep, what sleep, right? So you have to trust, like you have to hire good people,
Yeah.
and then you have to trust they're going to do their jobs. Um,
Yeah.
so talk about how do you talk about trust amongst that organization, and how do you
Mm,
build trust in your people?
yeah. Um, Ironically or not, trust is one of the three value words. And trust, impact, and responsibility, right? I think
Hmm.
trust, absolutely trusting in each other, right? I think trusting in that vision and our commitment to it are those ways. I think how we really trust in our approach, in our processes, and in our football, right? Like these are elements that will show up on or off the pitch, right? We need the players to trust one another, trust that, John, if you're, an outside back, that you're going to be in the position that you're going to be in, knowing the game plan so that I can play you that ball efficiently, quickly,
Hmm.
knowing that you're going to be there, right? We have to have that trust
Hmm.
in one another so that we can ultimately see out the vision and make that impact. And the same thing with impact and responsibility. I mean, I could break down even on and off the field examples of what that looks like, but we need to hold each other accountable. Um, and we can have impact, like literally physical impact and tackles, right?
Hmm.
To off the field and off the pitch in our community. What type of impact
Hmm.
are we making off the pitch as well? But ultimately, we want to be able to represent our club, be able to represent our values and our daily actions, whether that's on the pitch, off the pitch. And I think one of the main drivers that our head coach Becky Tweed has been talking about this year and this preseason. This is her first preseason as head coach. Is that responsibility to hold each other accountable, and making sure that we are getting the fine details correct and accurate. So, I mean, there are literally things that our players can do in their daily actions, so the staff can do in their daily actions, and
Hmm.
that's where I think that's where we drive the culture, right? It
Yeah.
is in the big decisions, it is in the small decisions, and how we show up every single day that ultimately will drive these values,
Hmm.
and that we can then point to and say, like, yes, we are living our values through these actions.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we're not. So is this a good
Or we're not.
path to go down?
Exactly.
Right. Um,
Exactly.
I mean, you talk about, right, that we have to trust that the right back is going to be at the right spot in the right time and know her role. The right back has to trust the sports science department that they're fit and healthy and ready to go. They have to trust the marketing that they're going to fill the stadium. Like all these things
Yeah.
come in. And when they talk
Yeah.
about great sports leaders, the Alex Fergusons or something, they always talk about how he knew everyone's name in the building, right?
Mhm.
It didn't
Yeah.
matter if you were the kit man or the person checking people in at the front desk. Like he knew who you were
Right.
because you added to the collective. Everyone does that. And I think that's so powerful. What about this idea of trust and accountability in the wake of like the Yates report? Obviously, so much focus on especially on the NWSL and women's soccer with that. Not only on the professional level, but at least it's started to trickle down onto the youth level. So that whole idea of trust and accountability of, staff, coach, athlete relationships, everything as well. There was just a NWSL team that just fired a staff member or two this
Yeah.
season, I think, for
Yeah.
crossing that line. And so how do you manage that piece as well?
Yeah. I mean, a few things, I think, and, not to get completely deep, but I mean, you know, we are all affected and impacted, right, by the
Mhm.
things that have come before us and things that we're still
Mhm.
experiencing today and to
Mhm.
date. Yes, two different teams, different, situations of um, firing staff members.
Mhm.
And I think there is a part of it that starts with the process
Mhm.
and, trusting in that we are doing the right things to properly assess
Mhm.
before someone's even brought into the environment, right? And I think
Mhm.
um, that is part of what you can do in terms of just at the very beginning. In our interview process, we have our head of HR, our head of, people and culture
Mhm.
as part of all of the interviews that we do, more so for a culture check than anything
Mhm.
else, right? Is this person aligned with our values, right?
Yeah.
Is this person going to fit in to the culture? Because ultimately it needs to work for both of us, right? It needs
Yeah,
to work
yeah,
for
yeah.
that person. It needs to work for us as well. Two, obviously the background checks that happen and at the league level as well. But I think process is a huge part of it. And I think, as we are just looking at how things were done in the past, right?
Mhm.
I'm gonna this person is gonna bring in their buddy, right? To coach or to have this role, right? Like we can't do that.
Mhm.
We have to have higher standards of
Mhm.
process and
Mhm.
diligence. So I think these are things that are uh, just by design of intentionality of how we do things. That is a large part of that. And then ultimately, it's also having to have tough conversations sometimes, right? And
Mhm.
having to, and also creating spaces for
Mhm.
people to share and be vulnerable and to allow for trust to be built.
Mhm.
Um, I think part of my role is really establishing and reestablishing trust
Mhm.
amongst players and staff
Mhm.
because we have people coming in from past experiences that why would they trust their general manager, why would they trust a coach when
Mhm.
they've had experiences that have told them not to, right?
Yeah.
And so part of it is you can't just come in and expect that, oh well, I know I'm this
Mhm.
way, right? And they should trust me. Like eh, that is just setting yourself up for failure, in my opinion. And I
Right.
think it's really coming in and doing the work, right?
Yeah.
Setting the right culture. It's saying that it's not just saying the things, but it's how we do the things that
Yeah.
will really speak volumes. And I think that's where, especially as a new club,
Right.
ultimately we have to make changes. We have to make hard decisions, but
Yeah.
if it's still values align. And the two things that we always default to, whether it's trades, whether
Hmm.
it's, firing or hiring, is it person oriented and is it championship focused, right?
Hmm.
Those are the two things that we really are going to default to, where we're keeping the person at the center of this decision, as well as is it achieving our ultimate goal, right? Of setting that standard globally in women's professional sports.
I love it. I mean, it's so important and so incredibly impactful now when
Yeah.
you get those things aligned for sure. I think about, right, obviously on here we're just talking more on sort of what happens on the field more often than what happens off the field. And I think it's hard, right? When you're Becky Tweed, when you're a coach and you have, you know, I don't know what your roster is, 24 players or whatever it is, right? Every game you're disappointing 13, right? And so the
Yeah.
ability to have those difficult conversations and then also the ability for those players to understand that my role today is this, not this, is a really, it's a really hard thing. And we see it a lot in sports now when with the intersection of the mental wellness conversation, which is incredibly important, but that it also doesn't become weaponized
Mm.
against a coach who's just doing her job or his job. And
Yeah.
it's a really hard balance, I think, to strike. And I get to work with some amazing coaches on the collegiate level who really do that well. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've worked with some who have lost their jobs. Um, and I don't necessarily know that it was through any fault of them, but
Hmm.
basically, sometimes it's easier to fire a coach than realize that maybe they're not the problem. Right.
Hmm.
So, I mean, how do you all support your head coach when she's making the tough decisions as well? Because she has to know that
Yeah.
you got her back.
Yeah. That is probably one of the most talked about areas that I have with Becky.
Hmm.
And I think there's a few things, and I think what she does, what we do really well, staying in constant communication about
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
think, being able to understand the conversations that she's having, who she's having them with, what is the content of that conversation, always having a second person in that room, right?
Hmm.
In that meeting space, for player safety, for staff safety, but also just for another set of ears of what is going on in that conversation. Because I
Yeah.
think, we all have our versions of the story. And so
Yeah.
um, I think it's really important that, and really pleased with how my relationship with Becky has evolved and, continued to iterate as she stepped into this role, is staying in contact about that. And, so when we're in future conversations, I also have the context of what has already happened and
Hmm.
why a player might be bringing something up or why Becky might be saying something else. And ultimately, I do trust her. I do
Yeah.
trust my coach,
Yeah.
which I think that is the fundamental part of what needs to be established. And if
Hmm.
that's not there, then, things can get messy. But ultimately, having the trust in Becky and her decisions, she is the one who is out on the pitch daily with these players at training and can make the best call for who should be starting, who should be playing. Obviously she is supported by, medical performance, the sports science department, right? Our trainers, so the physical and psychological state of our players, right? We have
Hmm.
wellness checks, to her technical staff as well. So I think the way that we operate is collaborative. Ultimately, she's going to make that final decision, but it's not without process. It's not without research, diligence, information so that she can make the best choice, against the opponent, right? And against the
Yeah.
style of play, against what the,
Yeah.
our strengths are. And so, ultimately she's taking all of that information together.
Hmm.
And I trust her to make, the best possible decision. She knows that this is something where her job is to get us wins, right? And
Yeah.
so, she is going to do what she thinks is, best to get us to that outcome. So
Yeah.
I think, first and foremost, it's established with trust at a foundation, but I think that communication and our ability to, for me to receive information also allows me to then support and back her in those tough conversations.
Yeah. And it's a hard thing, but I think that's so important. I mean, what I see, what you just kind of talked about is the coaches who do it most successfully meet at least once a week with everyone involved. So as a college
Mhm.
coach, right, it's your whole staff, it's the athletic training
Yeah.
staff in charge of your team, it's the strength and conditioning person, it's the sports psychology, if there's nutrition, whatever it
Yeah.
is, we all sit down operations and we all sit down in the same room once a week so everyone's on the same page about what this
Yeah.
is. And where I see the problems lying is that if sports psychology starts to operate independently, right? The support staff of the
Mhm.
head coach operates independently and is not in the mix. They're not at practice. They're not having the conversations and hearing what the coaches see or things like that.
Mhm.
That's where the problems arise.
Yeah.
And so that collaboration of all of us together give each player their best chance. And I mean, and of course, when a player is not in the first 11 or not in the team, they're disappointed. They wouldn't be there
Yeah.
if they weren't. And certainly
Exactly.
you've been there, gone to a World Cup and not played, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, and so, of course you're bitter, but that's the job of the coach because no coach is going, let me think how we can not win today, right?
Right.
They're
Yeah.
like, I'm going to do what we believe is giving us the best chance. And we have this outcome bias, right? Like, well, it works.
Right.
Like, oh, coach is brilliant. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean you were wrong.
Yeah.
It just means it didn't work
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, and those meetings that you were just talking about, like for us, that happens once a day. So
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
every
Yeah.
morning before training, like all the departments are getting together. They're going through everything. They're going through the game plan for that day and for training, getting the assessment. So Becky's getting that information on a daily basis. And um, I think, that obviously is important because things can change very quickly. I think also it is something where people understanding their roles too.
Hmm.
Becky, I think as a head coach, it is very challenging to do all the things that you need to do,
Hmm.
and have constant, consistent meetings with all the players, right? So that means, you know, the other coaches need to be able to have that as part of their role, which they do. So I think
Hmm.
it's also, not everyone's going to feel as comfortable going to the head coach, right? I think that just
Hmm.
by nature of what happens. But that also allows for the opportunity for, the assistant coaches to also develop those relationships and be another outlet for the
Hmm.
players, to be another source of supporting Becky
Hmm.
in those decisions. And so I think it also helps to shape what people's roles and responsibilities are, even as a staff too.
Yeah.
So that when those, conversations happen, that, ultimately Bucky's going to have conversations when a player's role is changing game to game. But, for the consistent support, in between those periods, what does that look like? And
Hmm.
that's where we need other coaches to also play a major role too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're coming towards the end here, but I wanted to ask you, like, where do you see this going, women's professional sport? I mean, it's on such a great trajectory, not
Hmm.
just soccer, right? But
Yeah.
Caitlin Clark in basketball and other sports, and we have an Olympics coming up this year, which always
Yeah.
tends to shine the light on women's
Yeah.
sports maybe more than any other event. And so it's really cool. I mean, I went to one of the best soccer games I've ever been to last year. I took my boys to Spain and we went to see Barcelona
Hmm.
women play Roma at the Camp
How
Nou.
is that?
62,000 people, Champions League. Barcelona put on a masterclass. It was incredible, right? And my boys
Amazing.
were, we're going to the game and it's Camp Nou and it's exciting, but they were blown away. The atmosphere, the quality of play. And I mean, Aitana Bonmati, like,
Hmm.
wasn't on quite the world name and that she became after winning the golden ball for the World Cup. But
Yeah.
I mean, she was just incredible, and like the boys were just blown away. And I was just, I mean, I thought about it as well, like and those games are happening more and more often. Big games, in English FA Cups and big teams meeting, and in Spain, Clásicos, and in the United States now, and
Yeah.
it's so fantastic to see. So you guys have this core value of impact on the game and I think responsibility for growing it. But where do you see it going? Now that we're finally investing in it.
Yeah, right.
What a
Those
shocker.
are two
If you
big
put
things.
money
Yeah.
behind it, it actually works.
Yeah, crazy what happens, right? When you invest in women's sports the way that people invest in men's sports.
Yeah.
Uh, we're just at the start, I believe, of
Yeah.
where this is going. And I think what I'm very appreciative of is seeing and being a part of the past and where
Hmm.
we were,
Yeah.
and now also seeing and living in and being a part of the now and where it's going.
Hmm.
Because it's vastly different. And I think I was just mentioning to you, maybe even just offline before we jumped on here, but my parents are out here visiting and seeing for the first time an Angel City game and at home
Mm.
in LA. And, my little 7-year-old self came out when, I first started playing this game. I had pigtails and everything. And just to think back of where my personal journey started in this sport, and
Hmm.
to be able to bring my parents out and have them sit pitch side in front of 22,000 fans, and to experience the support
Hmm.
behind not just this team, but behind women's sports, I
Hmm.
think is a testament to where we are going, because we are seeing more investments. We are seeing valuations of, just within women's professional soccer in our country, just skyrocketing, right? Buying in at 5 million and valuations at 100 million, or,
Yeah.
seeing the
Yeah.
different clubs being sold, and, what they are being sold at. And I think seeing new expansion teams coming into this league, and, Bay FC buying at 55 million,
Yeah.
so I mean, it is just, when you look at not just the growth, but the rapid growth and the short period of time,
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit of that indication of where we're going, right? Because it's not slowing down. I think when you're
Yeah.
looking at big picture, you're seeing these valuations of the clubs. When you're looking smaller, more micro, we're seeing even within trade values of players, you know, compensation of players and where
Hmm.
that's going. I mean, I used to work in real estate, and I'm, to comp a property out, right? You go back 6 months, and, for players and for trades and things like that, typically you could probably look within the last year. And now I'm looking at like the last 3 months. What
What the
happened
last,
last week?
what
You
happened last
know,
week? Because there's a
what
new
happened
market.
last week?
Yeah.
Because it literally is a new market for women's professional sports.
Mm.
And people are buying in, people are paying attention. This is not a charity. This is a business. And I think people are seeing the real value and investment in that.
Yeah. I think it's incredible. I've had pinch me moments in my life, right? From, you know, the beginning of Major League Soccer, and I was playing with a USL team that outdrew some of the MLS teams at that time, to I remember I went to my first Portland Timbers game,
Yeah.
and sat in the stands as the whole crowd sang the national anthem, just like, with like tears, almost like, I can't believe where we've come, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is probably what your parents felt, and what you felt at that first home game, when you put it all together. And even, not to bring in men's sports, but just watching the David Beckham documentary, and the sort of last
Mhm.
scene when Messi's playing for his
Yeah.
team and scores the winning goal, and everyone's like going crazy, and you just I feel like Beckham's just sitting there like, it worked. Like, holy cow, to think of his
Yeah.
journey, the plunge to go to the galaxy and all this sort of stuff. Like, it's just incredible. So, I mean, good luck, because I think it's
Thank
so
you.
beautiful. And as the father of a 18-year-old daughter who's been inspired by you and still has your picture up on her wall, and an autograph picture from you, and so many of your teammates, and what you do now is just great. So, really thank you for everything you've done and continue to do. And best of luck on the field as well, because
Well,
I
thank
know
you.
that you're going to have a great impact, and a few extra wins always helps.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it, and always appreciate your support. And I'm glad your daughter still has that picture. And I think it's where we are is a special place to, hopefully inspire all people, right? All genders, all ages. And just even your reference to Beckham there, and to think of how popular he was, right? And if he's thinking that way and feeling that way, even about what he's done with Messi, um, you know, you can understand why this is just so incredibly special within women's sports. So thank you for all you do to advance and continue these conversations.
Awesome. Well, Ange, thanks so much for being on the Way of Champions. This was just a wonderful talk.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Wow, everyone, thanks for listening. Man, that was such a wonderful talk. You can see what an incredible human being Angela is, and leader, and just how her involvement, for what she learned on the field to what she learned running a nonprofit, to now the general manager of this incredible professional women's sports franchise and owner, with the public spotlight on everything they do, both good and bad. Such a great conversation, and I just again love these takeaways, and of being purpose driven and values align, right? That if we're not building trust, if we're not having an impact, if we're not being responsible to the game and our community, we're not doing it right. And I think for any team and any coach, getting those values crystal clear, and then bouncing your decisions off, does this align with who we are and what we say we're going to do? The way we hire people, the way we sign people, the way we coach people, the way we interact with our community is absolutely critical. So thanks again to Angela. Thank you to all of you, to our Patreon podcast champions. Thank you to Sprocket Sports. And just one more shout out here: get registered soon, either live stream or in person. Way of Champions 2024, Denver, Colorado, August 9th, 10th, and 11th. Pete Steinberg will be presenting Tara Vanderveer, and one more great announcement coming up here very shortly as well. So remember, everyone, your influence is never neutral. Go out there, leave a positive impact on the world every single day, every time you walk into a room, right? Do that, and the world will be a better place. We'll see you again next week.